Hi, everyone. If you can get settled, we are so honored to have Your Excellency Mia Mottley join us. This is the first time we have a dedicated space in the Blue Zone for children and youth. And I just want to welcome you and recognize how impactful your statements have been, and that we all watched that intervention at COP26. I watched it about 19 times. And just to dissect the amount of substantive input you gave in that intervention, and it does not go unnoticed. We've all seen it. So that's why it's such a privilege to talk to you today. And a lot of us are not in the finance sector, so we don't fully grasp the technicalities of the World Bank and the IMF, but it doesn't take an expert to know that it's rigged against developing countries, the global south. And you said the global south countries borrow at 14% and developed countries borrow at 4%, so it's skewed towards them. So I think I'll just do a quick introduction, and then if you can address the young people, we do a quick Q&A and take a photo. That's how we'll run this session. And I think maybe just to, you can excuse my French, but I think the reason why you resonate so much with young people is because we can spot BS, a mile away. So, so it's really an honor. We think of you as you have our best interest at heart. We look voices like ours, your voice is a spotlight, for us in maybe an ocean of pledges and commitments. We know you are going to implement all these pledges. With that, I think I'll just pass the microphone to you. Let us know how you use us to deliver anything you want to deliver. And yeah, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank you for being here and for the warm welcome. And thank you for the blue, yellow, and black. With me is my Foreign Minister, Kerry Simmons, so you can... Look, I'm really honored and humbled to be here this afternoon because we need to have a conversation. And I hope this is just the first of many. There's a lot of background noise, and it's not necessarily conducive to have the long conversation that I want to have, but I think we need to have a long conversation at some point. The world is at a difficult point, and I'm going to say some things that you'll love, and I'm going to say some things that you may not love, because that's the reality of life. But the most important thing is that I need you guys to read and to become conversant with the issues. Because if you're not, that is when you're going to lose the battle. The new battle really is the battle of the mind. And to that extent, we have to be able to work together while remembering that we don't live in a romantic novel. We don't live in a romantic movie. We live in the real world, and there are real people who have to feed their families every day, and who need to be able to have housing, and who need to be able to fight off the worst effects of the climate. One of the statements that I've had to make today over and over is that many of us don't have the buffer. And yes, the climate crisis is hitting Europe. Yes, the climate crisis is hitting the US. Yes, the climate crisis is hitting China. But they have a buffer that we don't have. So that when the Hurricane Ian hits the west coast of Florida, and we see utter devastation for those communities, at a local level, they get it because they feel what our people feel when they meet devastation. But at the national level, they have the capacity to rebound, and they have the capacity to absorb. But when it hits the Bahamas, and Grand Bahama and Abaco is taken out, then those kids, those families, all of them are affected. So one of the things we've been saying is there is an urgency of now. That's not my statement. That's Martin Luther King. Okay? Just like emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. It's battle of the mind. Bob popularized it, but it isn't Bob either. It's Marcus Messiah Garvey. Okay? So that we need to begin to understand that the reason why we are speaking and doing these things with such urgency is because we are potentially 24 or 48 hours away from a different reality. I cannot imagine what it means to have 1 million people displaced in Nigeria as we speak. I can't imagine. I can't imagine what it means to have a third of Pakistan underwater. We have, therefore, to be able to get the discussions in and completed. You know, I leave here to go and do the Mandela lecture. And one of the things that all of us can learn from Nelson Mandela is that he could have stood on the side of what were his absolute rights when independence and apartheid was fought down. But he chose to look and see how he could build a new future that encompassed everyone. We are at a point in the world where the polycrisis, the climate, the pandemic, the possibility of future pandemics because the antimicrobial resistance. How many of you know about the antimicrobial resistance difficulties that the world is facing? It's the third cause of death in the world because our bodies have built up the resistance to antibiotics, and something as simple as going to the dentist or having a baby can now become a high wire act if you have an infection. The other issues in terms of inequity, the other issues, of course, most devastating in terms of cost of living. Inflation is a cancer. It's no different from pancreatic cancer because it eats away at your capacity to survive. And all of a sudden, when that starts to enter the room, as has happened with the rise in fuel prices, the rise in food prices, people stop remembering about principle and philosophy and they start to remember only about survival. So all of these things are threatening to destabilize the world in which we live. And the one thing that we need is a calm, confident, and clear head to see the future. And what matters now is how do we secure the public space? How do we secure the global commons? How do we secure the earth? Because it's no sense making as much profit as you want for the next 20, 30 years, and then your grandchildren don't even have a planet to live on in 50 or 70 years. And these are the realities that we have to fight. We need a reorientation of some of the values. How does a world value the movement of money and capital, but does not value the movement of people? How do we have people sitting in boats, not being able to get off, without consideration as to what public health diseases and what that will do to them? How do we see color before we see humanity? These are the things that you have to fight for. And if you can help stabilize the world, it doesn't mean, as I said, remember what I said, there's not going to be a romantic ending necessarily. Life is difficult. Life is complex. And all issues are not black or white. There's a lot of gray. And how you manage the gray is really the true test of adulthood. Accepting the consequences of your choices. Now, what does that mean? I come here to COP last year, and we give our NDCs. We expect that there will be a 70% reduction, Kerry, by 2030, and we want to be ambitious enough to see whether we can make 2035 100% net zero. Problem is that Barbados doesn't manufacture everything it needs. We don't produce all that we need, and the moment that we're in teaches us that we became slaves to a comfortable life without worrying about security of food and security and independence of energy and security and independence on a whole range of other things. So we wake up and we want to get there. But we're not going to get there by a beam me up Scotty moment, because it takes time to plant, to grow, and to reap. It takes time to put renewable energy in your country such that the majority can benefit. But if I can't get access to the batteries, no matter how much money I may well be able to unlock, no matter how much ambition I have put on the table, I still cannot deliver. And therefore, what happens in the interim? Do I say to our populations that you should not live? Or do I have to accept that the reality of our existence means that we have to find a bridge? But it must be a bridge and not a destination. And that is why even on this whole issue of natural gas, we have to be able now to consider it, not because we want to, but because the reality of existence for millions of people in Africa, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, depends on having still secure access to energy in order to be able to live. Now, part of the difficulty is that everybody wants to throw everything in one pot and just throw it up, and it's either good or bad. The oil companies cannot continue to earn the level of profits that they're earning while other people across the world are sucking salt and having it difficult to live. Can't. By the same token, if you take away everything from them and there's nothing to reinvest, then you don't have progress into the research and development as to what opportunities may well be there for clean energy. So too far east is what? West. Let us therefore start to develop a culture for mature consideration and conversation, because we are not robots. We have the capacity to discern. And the power of discernment is perhaps the greatest gift that we need to give each other. Because as we grow older and as we fight the individual battles of our life, we understand that it's not black, it's not white, it's somewhere in there. And what is good for you may not be good for you, may not be good for him, may not be good for me. And our ability to discern and to be able to break down. I have a favorite phrase. Let us deconstruct and let us reconstruct. Because we're going to ask ourselves, what is the public purpose we're trying to serve? What is the public mischief we want to get away from? How can we use technology to become more efficient in what we're doing to benefit more? But at the end of the day, who are we helping and who are we hurting? And if you ask yourself those few questions, then we can begin to reconstruct the world in which we live and start to begin to believe that it is possible to build a just global order. But when 1% of the world's population controls 46% of its capital, then that's not fair. Now, by the same token, I'm sure if we have conversations with them, they too will agree, if put in a box, that that's not fair. So let's start to have the conversations about how we protect that global commons. And the first global commons that has to be protected is what? The planet Earth. The planet Earth. Because we haven't yet constructed the way to live on Mars. The problem is that, I regret to say, political establishment responds to movements, to power. And in our own case, I mean, I don't profess to be perfect, nor does he, nor does my government. We're not divine. But what we do say is that we need to pause sometimes and listen, even when we get it wrong. We need to pause and listen and to see how we can, as we say in the Caribbean, wheel and come again. You understand? Because that's the only way we're going to get it right, through continuous conversation, through respect, and through an attempt to adhere to principles. And principles only mean something when it is inconvenient to stand by them. And that's the message. Are we going to be perfect 100%? Probably not. But should we be perfect the majority of times and try to do right? Yes, we should. Now, where does that leave us? And I felt constrained to address you first on these values, because the conversation will not always be the one that every one of us in the room will like. But what we have to do first and foremost is to agree to the rules of engagement. That as human beings, we respect one another. That as human beings, we accept that our diversity means diversity of opinion, and that one of the difficulties about the world in which we live is that there is too much narrowcasting rather than broadcasting. That we listen only to the people who sound like us. But when we do that, we end up with what? With war. We end up with division. And then that robs you of the best part of your life that you could otherwise be living. So if we get the rules of engagement correct, and let me go back to Nelson Mandela again. Mandela chose reconciliation rather than vengeance. The Bible tells us that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, for a reason. Because it's not about each of us. But what I want us to do is to recognize that we can achieve what we want to achieve. And human history has shown that the tendency for progress is there. And as President Obama often says, it doesn't come in a straight line. But if you look at the trajectory, we're getting there. Women could not vote before. Now we have women leaders. But does it mean that everything is right for women? No, it doesn't. There's still too many women who are the victims of domestic abuse. There's still too many women who don't have the opportunity for economic security. But there has been appreciably progress for women. How do we continue the journey? And that's why I love the analogy of passing the baton. And that's why I will always meet with young people, regardless of whatever I'm doing, because I'm conscious that I can only run for so far on this race, and that at some point I have to do so. But in the same way that I have been the beneficiary of the knowledge and experience of those who went before me, you need to become that. And I want us, therefore, to commit, because we would need all day to talk about everything. But I want us to commit to seeking knowledge and not fake news, seeking knowledge. And in order to ensure that it is not fake, to develop the power of discernment, being able to discern for yourself what is right, what is fake, what is deceptive, because these things matter. Secondly, I want us to recognize that we are in the battle of our lives for the climate, for the world, for the planet on which we live. And any one of us could potentially be the next victim, because it is not within our control. But at the same time, as much as we know that we need to change, we have to be pragmatic as well. Because we can't wiggle our nose for those who are old enough to watch Bewitched with Elizabeth. And for those who know Star Trek with Beam Me Up, Scotty, we're not yet at the position where we can make things happen like that. So how do we protect the lives and livelihoods of those who are still on the front line, but who may not have the luxury to control their space and their place at the particular time? It means, therefore, that the art of compromise still has to be within us. And one of the things that bothers me is that the technology and the narrowcasting can sometimes make us believe that it is a zero-sum game. Life is not a zero-sum game. Having said that, do not anybody believe that that is an excuse not to try. And the Talmud has a wonderful saying that I have carried with me all my life, that we are not expected to complete the task, but neither are we at liberty to resile from it. And that is the concept of the baton and the relay that has caused me to realize that what we are required to do is the job we have, not the job we want. Because if we run our leg and do it well, then others will be equally inspired to take it from us. Now, where does that leave us? Today is election day in the US. We need, and special drawing rights is the most unsexy thing that you could ever want to talk about. But it is essentially, the IMF is like a club of central banks. And the special drawing rights, which were introduced in the late 1960s, didn't exist before. But what it did was to give each central bank the right to leverage the strength of the reserves of the others in the club. So we all belong to a club. Today I'm really weak and down, but I can leverage what you have to help me get through my journey. That's all it is. But here's what happens. When we've been issuing them, it's only the strong that really benefit, because the articles of agreement don't necessarily allow for the redistribution of them without the consent of the owner. So that if the large countries who got 400 billion of the 650 don't want to help share it for the benefit of the weakest, then it doesn't have the same impact as if we change the agreement to say that we should be able to have not only additional special drawing rights, but that they should be used for those who really need it or for the causes that threaten our very existence. The head of the IMF, Kristalina, she's been good, great in fact. She was the only game in town when the pandemic came, and she provided liquidity to countries that didn't have money to spend. She's the one that got the 650 billion in special drawing rights done, but guess what? The majority of it has still stayed with the rich countries. She's the only one that has put on the table a resilience and sustainability trust. So my country is likely to be able to borrow 20-year money from the IMF with a 10.5-year moratorium at virtually bottom shelf interest rates. Now, I wish I could say that about the World Bank. But when we go to the World Bank now, we're told that Barbados and Bahamas and Maldives have graduated and we're above the threshold of what is allowed to borrow. And that if we potentially want to borrow, they may even want to degraduate us. I don't want to be degraduated because that comes with other consequences. What I want is for you to recognize that the right to borrow should not only be based on historic per capita income, because the per capita measurement that they use is historic. It's last year or the year before. Now that's the equivalent of me going to the doctor, asking the doctor to take my blood pressure today, but then ask that it be valid a year from now to determine whether I'm going to get a stroke or not. Absolutely a waste of time, because it no longer tells you what my condition is. And what we're saying to the World Bank, what we're saying to the IMF, what we're saying, but predominantly the World Bank, because the IMF has gotten it, because they're using climate vulnerability as a consideration for who can draw from the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. Well, we want the World Bank equally to follow the IMF. And that's so funny, because when I was growing up, it was the other way around. Now it's the other way around. It's the IMF who's seeing us and hearing us and feeling us. But we want the World Bank to be able to say that it's not just per capita income that will determine who can borrow at concessional rates. That climate vulnerability. Because let me break it down in straight terms. Today in Barbados, we are dealing with issues of education reform. If we get hit, God forbid, with a hurricane, overnight, I can move from dealing with issues of education reform to basic access to schools again. Because if all of the schools are destroyed, where am I going to send my children to school? And that is what is at risk for many of us. If people lose their houses, where are they going to sleep without worrying about the exposure to the elements? These are the things that matter, and the World Bank needs to recognize that if it is going to be the bank for reconstruction and development, not just in the middle of the 20th century, but in the middle of the 21st century, then it needs to come to the realities of the 21st century, which include climate, which include pandemics, which include digital divide, which include inequity in countries. And why is there inequity? Because many of our countries are being told that we have to borrow for 7 and 10 years. Now tell me how you're going to develop education and schools or healthcare with a 7 or a 10-year loan. The purpose of a loan is to give you enough time for those who benefit from the loan to be there to help you pay back for the loan. It's simple. And that's why 7 and 10-year money doesn't work for us. So I've said a lot today, and perhaps, as I said, this is just the first of many conversations. I want to pause. I'm sure that a few of you want to speak, but let me just leave you on this point. The Bridgetown Agenda is not a historic relic or meant to be a wonderful statue that we look at. It is meant to be something that everyone contributes to. It's our contribution to say, look, this is a perspective that we have. We know that there are others who want to do and to have a say on it. Some things are immediate and necessary because of how many countries are on the global precipice of debt. But some things may allow you to have a little more leisurely approach to commentary. We are saying that we will take comments from people between now and early February so that we can refashion the document as necessary. But that we also recognize that for the longer term, deeper reforms and governance, that we can go probably till the end of July, which gives NGOs and civil society more opportunity for more grassroots consultation and more bottoms-up approach on these issues. We get it, but we have to walk and chew. And a lot of what I said earlier is to remind you that that is our reality. Last night, I went to sleep and did not know that the people of the Dominican Republic became the victims of a climatic event and that lives were lost there. God knows what will happen next weekend. The point is that we are on almost a conveyor belt that's not stopping with climate. And if we don't have some practical approaches while remaining anchored to our principles, we're not going to make the journey successfully. I pause, I done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I am absolutely blown away. I felt so many emotions while hearing you speak, and I feel like every single one in this audience did, joy, sadness, pride, but mostly inspiration. And I can see as you were talking, every single person here was hanging on to your every word, as was I. So thank you, that was brilliant. And actually...
Let me stop now too.
Okay.
I do not want to become somebody who is a symbol just to be praised up and think that's not me. Because all of us at the end of the day got to come back down to ground. And the challenge is that there are not enough hours in the day, not enough minutes in the day to reach everybody. And I've had to learn that the hard way. But I do feel that if we can work together, what matters is not simply the goal. What must matter ultimately is the progress, the destination. So even if all I can do is carry you to the destination of handing over the baton, that's my role, that's my course.
Thank you. Okay, there's so many things I want to say right now, but I know you're short on time, so I'm actually gonna now pass over to the audience. And I think maybe let's just take 2, 3. Let's take 3 at one time. So I'll take your pick. Sure.
Thank you guys for letting the crazy man who stood up too soon have the microphone. I hear with a heart of love for everybody in this room. And my brother here, Devon, tell me I must stand up and call the whole Caribbean because he was on WhatsApp, making sure everybody was here to support you. So we got Chandel, we got all of the Caribbean here. These are the future leaders. We here with a heart of love to work with you all. Everybody stand up from the Caribbean. Let them see you so they can know to come talk to for the Caribbean. Much love. Much love.
I wish I had a ball that I could throw you for the next baton. We're ready for you. We're ready for you.
Hi, Ma'am Mottley. Respect, respect, respect. I'm Chandel O'Neill from Trinidad and Tobago. And speaking of NDCs, if you won't mind, could you ring Rowley's ears on our 6-page piece of nonsense? Like, that's my little question right now. If you could, maybe. Thanks. Okay.
Let's go.
Good morning, Mar. Sorry, good afternoon, Mar. I'm Goodness Dixon from Nigeria. You talked about we making studies, we making research. I come from a community being affected by the climate crisis. So in this case where our schools are being drawn away, where our homes are being destroyed, how do we make research? How do we study in this case? How do we learn? How do we build ourselves? Secondly, we talk about transitioning from the fossil fuel to clean energy. Is Africa ready for transitioning? Because we have our own means of making income, you understand, revenue. But how do we now transit when the developed countries already have all the structures in place? And we don't have the structures in place. Thank you very much.
I think that what we're trying to do is to create that platform for a just transition. The issue is just is an adjective. So what is just for some may not be just for others. And the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we have the same definition of just. You know, justice is supposed to be absolute, but we've learned that some people define it how they want to. Africa has a unique opportunity. There are 600 million people still without electricity. We need to make sure that electricity is carried to them and that they're given the opportunity to access and to participate in their countries in the fullest possible way. If we can do that by using green energy, while at the same time recognizing that the bridge for others may still involve some natural gas, then we will make it. We can't, I wish we were in a position to say immediately green energy will happen tomorrow, but it takes time. Kerry used to be my Minister of Energy up until 2 weeks ago, and he will tell you, even though I have announced in Barbados that every owner-occupied house shall have, as of right, 2.5, 5, or 10 kilowatts of renewable energy, so that they participate in the patrimony and the bounty of it. It doesn't happen overnight, because you have the regulatory issues to resolve, you have the supply issues of battery, the supply issues of photovoltaic panels. So perhaps what I'm trying to say to you is that Africa must, yes, pursue green energy, but along the way, it has to carry people with what it has access to immediately. And the important thing is to have an inclusive approach, but one that ultimately recognizes that if we don't save this planet, this is a moot conversation. And today is your village, today is your community. You talk about houses and schools underwater. In St. Lucia, the same thing is happening. In Belize, it happened last week. In Dominican Republic, it happened yesterday. So that we do need to know that this is real, and we can't just turn up and say, lights, camera, action, because we're at a conference and then go away and forget about it. It matters how we plan to get granular and how we plan to deliver and implement. And that's why financing, trade, industrialization, just industrialization, getting the global south to be able to access borrowing at the same levels as the north, getting transfer of technology and access to capital for just industrialization, getting fair terms of trade. All of these things come together. When you want to eat cake, you don't go and eat flour, you don't go and eat eggs. You bring everything together and make the mixture to put it in the oven then to get the cake. There is a process to all of these things. And that's why I'm taking the time to break it down and to speak in this way, because the worst thing that can happen to our people is for them to believe that this is a beam me up Scotty moment. One more?
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you so much for the opportunity to ask you questions and to just hear your perspective on things. I think a lot of us as youth, as Caribbean youth as well, we look up to you and we appreciate the voice of discernment that you provide. I also think that as youth, we know that the climate movement is multifaceted in that you have to get not just large corporations and governments to agree, but people as well. So my question for you is just, how would you go about changing the cultural understanding around climate and waste and what our position is in this fight?
I think that we have a lot of cultural transformation to do regionally and globally. And you talked about climate and waste. I could as well talk about violence as a public health disease as well. Because too many of our people are on a path that makes no sense at all. And it is because what we value internationally is not necessarily rooted. Okay? If we believe in the pursuit of individual prosperity at the expense of everything else, then we will end up with the unjust societies that we have. We will end up with fossil fuels causing destruction. The one thing I know is that we need balance. And we need, as I said, that's why discernment is the key tool that you need as individuals. We need also to recognize that if our foreparents were not resilient, we wouldn't be here. Can you imagine what it was like to go through the Middle Passage and to have all elements of your dignity stripped away? They withstood that, and they were resilient enough to do it. We are in danger of being in what I call a period where the culture of contentment has become the new opiate. We've been dulled and everything is dumbed down on the basis of how good we're going to feel in the next minute. I love Kaiso and reggae as much as anybody else. But how does our music denigrate women in the way in which it has been doing perpetually? And I'm not a prude, and I'm not somebody who can't take a joke, and I'm not somebody who ain't gonna whine. You understand? But the reality is that that is not an excuse for you to women as if they were an inanimate object. Similarly, women have to accept that for themselves first. So that is part of the cultural transformation and sensitization that we need to deal with. Similarly, violence. How do we deal with violence? Similarly, how do we deal with waste? At the end of the day, there has to be tools taught to our children and young people based on a platform of values that allows them then to navigate their way through life. Is everybody in a society going to get it? No, they never have. They never will. But the question is, will the majority get it? And what will the society value as being acceptable and not acceptable? And that's why I say that the global order, regrettably, is not holding us to account in terms of the values that it wants us to promote and the values that it wants us to sustain and the behavior that it is prepared to accept. And I hope that you guys are going to help change it, because if everybody wants to get up and to do X, Y, Z, then too far east is always west. Balance is needed in order to be able to bring it about. Education, sensitization, but above all else, a platform of values, because right is right and wrong is wrong. And that's why I talk about moral strategic leadership at a global level. But it can only happen if it happens at the local level, the community level, and the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much to our audience for such interesting questions, and also thank you so much, Your Excellency. And remember what Her Excellency said in her intervention, that we are now fighting the battle of our lives. And it could be literally any country, anyone who it happens to next with the climate crisis. So thank you all today for coming to this session, and thank you again.